They came for the children first. Not the warriors, not the elders, not the chiefs. The children. Because whoever controls the children controls the future. And the United States government understood this with cold and calculated precision. Beginning in 1879 and continuing for nearly 100 years, the United States government systematically removed Native American children from their families. Not occasionally, not in isolated cases, systematically, as official national policy, funded by Congress, administered by the federal government, and endorsed by presidents. The stated goal was written down openly for anyone to read. Kill the Indian, save the man. Those words were not spoken in secret. They were spoken proudly, by the founder of the first Indian boarding school, in a public address, to an audience that applauded. Here is what actually happened. Children as young as 4 years old were taken. Sometimes government agents arrived at a family's home and simply took the child. Sometimes parents were told their children would receive an education and a better life, and believed it because they wanted better for their children. Either way, the result was the same. The child was gone. They were put on trains, sent hundreds of miles from everything they had ever known. From the Red Rock Desert of the Navajo Nation, from the Great Plains of the Lakota, from the forests of the Ojibwe, sent to institutions in Pennsylvania, in Virginia, in Kansas, in Oregon, places so far from home that the journey itself felt like the end of the world. When they arrived, their hair was cut. In many indigenous cultures, hair carries deep spiritual meaning. Cutting it was not a haircut. It was an assault on identity. Their traditional clothing was taken. Their names were changed. A child named Running Bear became Robert. A girl named Morning Star became Mary. And then, the most devastating act of all, they were forbidden from speaking their language. Not discouraged. Forbidden. Children caught speaking the words their mothers had taught them were beaten, physically struck by adults paid by the United States government to do exactly that. Some had their mouths washed out with soap. Some were isolated. Some were subjected to punishments so severe that the children who survived them carried the scars for the rest of their lives. Over 150,000 Native American children passed through this system. 150,000 children, taken from their parents, stripped of their language, stripped of their culture, stripped of their names, and told, repeatedly, forcefully, and with complete institutional authority, that everything about who they were was wrong and shameful and needed to be eliminated. Many of these children never came home. The federal government has now identified over 53 boarding school facilities where children died. Over 53. The deaths were from disease, from malnutrition, from the cold, from accidents, from punishments that went too far. Many children were buried in unmarked graves on school grounds, and their families were never told. Parents waited for children who were already in the ground. The last of these schools did not close in 1920, not in 1940, not even in 1960. The last federally funded Indian boarding school that operated under the assimilation mandate closed in 1973. 1973. That is not ancient history. People who are in their 50s and 60s today attended these schools. Your neighbor may have attended one of these schools and carried what happened there silently for decades. Here is what the system actually destroyed. When you take children away from their parents for years, you do not just disrupt one family. You break the chain of transmission that carries everything: language, ceremony, story, knowledge, identity, from one generation to the next. A grandmother cannot teach her granddaughter the traditional songs if the granddaughter has been taken away at age 5 and returned at age 17, speaking only English, and forbidden by shame from reconnecting with what she left behind. This is why many Native American languages are endangered today. Not because Native people stopped valuing their languages, because the government spent a century physically preventing those languages from being passed down. This is why Navajo code talkers, the men who used their language to help win World War II, had to hide the fact that they spoke Navajo in daily life, while simultaneously being classified military assets for speaking it. The same government that made their language a weapon also ran the schools that beat children for speaking it. In 2022, the United States Secretary of the Interior released the first formal federal investigation into the boarding school system. It identified over 400 schools across 37 states. It confirmed deaths at over 50 of them. It acknowledged for the first time in official government language that what happened was a systematic campaign to destroy Indigenous culture. In the same year, Pope Francis traveled to Canada to formally apologize for the Catholic Church's role in running residential schools there, the Canadian version of the same system. Apologies, reports, acknowledgments, but no reparations, no criminal accountability, no guarantee that the cultural knowledge destroyed over a century can be recovered. The children who were taken cannot be untaken. The languages that were beaten out of a generation cannot be fully restored. The grandmothers who never got to teach their grandchildren the old songs, that time is gone. What remains is the community, still here, still fighting, still teaching the children, this time on their own terms. There are Navajo language immersion schools today where children learn in the language their great-grandparents were beaten for speaking. There are cultural revitalization programs across dozens of nations working to recover what was taken. There are young Native Americans who have chosen to learn the old ways, not because anyone forces them to, but because they understand what was nearly lost and refuse to let it finish disappearing. The boarding school system tried to kill the Indian to save the man. What it could not calculate, what no institution built on cultural destruction can ever fully calculate, is that the people it targeted were more resilient than any policy designed against them. They are still here. If this story reached something in you, if you felt something hearing what was done to these children, please hit like right now. This story deserves to be heard by every person who believes children should never be weapons of government policy. Subscribe to this channel because every week we tell the stories that history books left out. The full truth about what happened to Native American nations and why it still matters in 2026. Share this with someone, a parent, a teacher, anyone who has children and can feel in their bones what it would mean to have them taken. And comment below, just one word. How did this story make you feel? Until next time, walk in honor, and never forget the children.